They say silence is a blessing. For a while, I believed that. Brimstead had that kind of silence, the kind that settles on your shoulders like a wool blanket in winter. After 20 years in military intelligence, I traded war zones for the hum of foggy mornings and factory steam. I ran a quiet trauma consulting business. My wife, Celia, taught literature at the university. My stepdaughter, Elise, called me Dad, even when she didn't need to. Life, I thought, had forgiven me. But peace, as I learned, is not the absence of noise. It is the stillness before the bomb drops. We lived in a gray-shingled house on the edge of town, close enough to hear the distant clang of the ironworks, but far enough for the birds to return in the mornings. I spent my days counseling first responders, veterans, and local law enforcement, people like me, running from ghosts with badges. Celia baked bread on weekends, taught Bronte on weekdays, and laughed with a kind of elegance that made people trust her instantly. Elise had her mother's grace, but a heart like flint. Bright, curious, a little too watchful for a teenager. She'd ask me questions no one else would. Questions about truth, about loyalty, about why I flinched at certain sounds. I told her half-truths, palatable versions of the wars I'd buried. For a while, everything made sense. That was the trap. It started to unravel one Friday in early autumn. Celia had said she'd be at a university fundraiser, but Elise mentioned in passing that her mom had left the house dressed in hiking clothes. Odd, but not damning. I chalked it up to an offhand lie. People bend the truth sometimes. Then came the overdraft notice. Then the envelope with my name misspelled, Jonas Rook, forwarded from a bank I'd never used. Inside was a statement for an account opened in my name. I asked Celia about it. She laughed, said it was identity fraud, said we'd figure it out together. That night, I watched her sleep, the way her face softened. And I realized I was starting to catalog her expressions, memorizing details like I used to do with targets. Not because I didn't trust her, but because something in me had shifted. There was a noise building beneath our silence, and I knew it wouldn't stay buried long. It started with the burner phone I found in her gym bag, stuffed in an old sock, too new to be accidental. No lock, just a trail of messages to a man named Colin Miles. They weren't love notes. They were logistics, dates, account numbers, passwords. There was even a photo of me at the pier, loading a shipment for a client. I didn't confront her. Not yet. My old training kicked in like muscle memory. Information first. Reaction later. Celia had access to my personal files. She knew things she shouldn't. She'd been using them, leaking intelligence disguised as case studies. Colin, I later learned, wasn't her lover. He was an offshore broker with ties to a mining firm I'd exposed in a government report 5 years ago. It was surgical, precise, intentional. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd leveraged me. I began to audit every corner of my life, digital, financial, personal. I discovered a hidden cloud storage folder under my name filled with documents I hadn't uploaded. Schematics, encrypted reports, field notes from my classified work. Materials that, in the wrong hands, could cost lives or money. Or both. That's when I understood. I wasn't just collateral. I was the source. The lies came sharper after that. Celia started disappearing on weekends. Claimed she was taking solo retreats for mindfulness. Elise once asked me if her mom had ever worked in politics. It caught me off guard. Apparently, a man in a black sedan had been picking her up. Her absence grew louder than any argument. At night, I'd lay awake, picturing her entire scheme as a map. Each pin a betrayal, each thread connected to someone with a reason to bury me. I reviewed every email she sent from our shared accounts. I built profiles on her associates, cross-referenced call logs, receipts, even her syllabus at the university. It wasn't just Colin. There was a pattern, a network, and still Elise. Unaware or pretending. Her eyes flicked to me longer than before, like she sensed something tectonic shifting beneath our feet. One day, she asked me if we were safe. I told her yes. It was a lie I could live with for now. I knew I couldn't keep Elise in the dark much longer. But I also knew Celia had eyes everywhere. She was watching me watch her. So I staged distance. I told her I was overwhelmed by work. That I'd started seeing a therapist in a neighboring town. She nodded like she cared. Like the act still mattered. She kissed my forehead before leaving that Sunday. I watched her walk to the car, her gait light-free. Like a woman untethered from consequences. That's when I knew. I wasn't going to reclaim the life I had. I was going to burn down the one she thought she'd stolen. Because what came next wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be an operation. I turned my office into a war room. Surveillance, audio taps, old-school dossier building. I didn't trust software. Only paper and silence. Elise had no idea. She was preparing for her last semester. Celia played the loving wife like a seasoned actress. If I didn't know the truth, I would have applauded her. I faked a nervous breakdown. Stopped shaving. Took long walks at night. Let Celia think I was collapsing. The more fragile I became, the bolder she grew. She logged into my laptop in front of me, thinking I wouldn't notice. She started making subtle financial moves, liquidating accounts, moving stocks. I created a new identity, Martin Callan. Used it to open a safety deposit box in Eugene. Loaded it with hard drives, handwritten logs, notarized timelines. I would not let my name rot in the shadows of her betrayal. I began staging errors in my business dealings, causing enough chaos to give her the illusion that I was unraveling. She smiled more. Her calls with Colin grew shorter, more confident. She had begun transferring documents to a drive I traced to a network in Belize. I leaked false information through that drive. Engineered blueprints, fake case reports. Some of them embedded with trackers. Others with embedded metadata that would trace the pipeline back to her IP. One evening, I watched from a distance as the drive was picked up in a trade handoff outside an old rail station. I filmed it all, documented every second. I wasn't just building a case. I was building a coffin. Elise found a map I'd marked up, locations, arrows, notes. She asked if we were leaving. I lied, told her it was an old habit. She nodded, but her silence lingered in the room longer than it should have. In the final week before Celia's planned retreat, which I now knew was a rendezvous in San Francisco, I installed a keystroke logger into her laptop. What I found broke something inside me. There was a message to someone named Marcus, someone higher in the food chain. She'd asked if it was time to close the loop. The attachment was a photograph of Elise and me, standing on our porch. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a threat, so I accelerated the plan. A dead drop in Seattle. A series of encrypted letters sent to a former handler in the bureau. I transferred Elise's college savings to a clean account under a new guardian. I booked 2 plane tickets, only one would be used. Because what came next wasn't just exposure. It would be the quiet demolition of everything Celia had built. The still knife had already cut. What came next was the bleed. You don't measure the weight of betrayal in years or dollars. You measure it in silences, long, aching silences that outlive the lie. The morning after Celia left for San Francisco, I set my plan into irreversible motion. I mailed the first envelope, an evidence package to the office of the Inspector General, complete with a letter signed by Martin Callan. It detailed the data trail Celia had created and implicated her financial accomplices, with an emphasis on Marcus. Another packet went to an investigative journalist I once saved from a botched extraction in Jordan. He owed me his life. I called in the favor. Celia's network began to unravel within days. Her Belize drive was traced and flagged. Colin's brokerage firm received a surprise audit. Interpol red-flagged their system based on the metadata trail I left like breadcrumbs. The man named Marcus? He tried to vanish. But the burner IPs I'd tagged in their digital correspondence traced to 3 different continents. And someone always talks when they're the last to fall. I stayed quiet, disappeared from Brimstead. Officially, I took a sabbatical. Elise was already on campus, enrolled early under a modified name, living in housing I prepaid through an alias. I checked in once a week. She never asked questions. She understood, somehow, that I had to finish this alone. One night, I sat in a motel room outside Anchorage, watching the news. Celia's mugshot appeared in the lower corner of the screen, stoic, chin high, as if dignity could hold back an avalanche. She'd been indicted. Money laundering. Espionage. Data theft. No mention of me. That was by design. I thought I'd feel triumph. I didn't. Just a hollow clarity. The kind I used to feel after an interrogation, when the truth came out, but the soul stayed buried. I burned the last of my field notes the next day. Everything but one photo, Elise, 10 years old, holding a fishing rod on the dock. I tucked it into the lining of my coat. The war was over. But peace doesn't come easily to men like me. Because Phase 5 wasn't about vengeance. It was about survival. Survival is not victory. It's the echo of what victory should have felt like. I learned that quickly in the days that followed Celia's arrest. Her name disappeared from the media faster than I expected, bought silence, leveraged immunity deals, the whole machine spinning to bury what it couldn't control. Marcus was found dead in Tangier. An overdose, they said. Neat handwriting for a man who once ran black channels across 3 continents. I didn't celebrate. I moved. Constantly. 3 towns in 4 months. Elise and I kept in touch using an encrypted channel I'd set up years ago for different reasons. She never asked when I was coming back. She only said, still breathing. Still safe. Love you. In some ways, that's all that mattered. I became Martin Callan full-time. Worked odd consulting gigs under assumed names. Avoided digital footprints. A ghost in my own aftermath. I kept a journal, not of what happened, but of how I felt. That was the harder thing. Admitting the ache. The loss. The hatred that no longer had a face to cling to. I visited Brimstead once. Just once. Long enough to walk past our old house. Someone else lived there now. They'd painted it blue. There were toys in the yard. Laughter. Real peace, maybe. I left without knocking. Some nights I dream of Elise as a child, running across the backyard with wildflowers in her hands. Other nights, I see Celia's eyes cold and focused, just before she knew I'd won. Both haunt me, but only one deserves to. I've built something new now. Not a life. A pattern. A way to stay free. To keep Elise untouched by the shadow I cast. I send her birthday letters with no return address. I wire her tuition from accounts under names she'll never trace. I live with the quiet agreement that she's better off without my ghost walking her halls. Phase 6 will come. I feel it. A time when she asks for the full story. When I'll hand over every file, every name, every coded page. And she'll have to decide who I really was. But until then I wait. Because peace isn't the end of war. It's the promise you make in its ashes. I always knew the reckoning wouldn't come with sirens. It would come quietly, like mist seeping through a cracked window. And it did. The email arrived on a Tuesday. Unmarked. Encrypted. Signed only, E. She was ready. Elise. We met in a town neither of us had been to before, halfway between her university and the edge of the Cascades. A place called Mercer Hollow. Neutral ground. She sat across from me in a diner booth, clutching a weathered notebook. Not a hello. Not a smile. Just this question. Why did you let me believe she loved us? I couldn't answer right away. She slid the notebook across the table. My handwriting stared back at me, copied phrases from the letters I'd sent in secret. Every name. Every code. Every careful omission. She had pieced it together. All of it. I didn't want to break what was left of your peace, I finally said. She looked at me, not as a daughter, not even as a stranger. She looked at me like someone taking inventory of a ruin. But you did, she whispered. You broke it when you didn't let me choose. The silence hung like an old coat between us. Eventually, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thumb drive. I hacked her archive, she said. She kept everything, even things you didn't find. Messages with names you never mentioned. There's a whole other layer, Dad. And it's still active. I took the drive with hands that felt suddenly ancient. Elise hadn't just connected the dots. I'd trained her, unknowingly, to see what I missed. She wasn't asking me to go back. She was pulling me forward. That night, we sat in silence on opposite ends of a motel bed. She told me about the nightmares she never shared. The therapist who said she'd never trust anyone fully again. The professor who reminded her of Celia's voice. I told her about my routines, 3 cities, 10 names, always moving. The quiet ache of being the ghost she carried but never spoke of. In the morning, she said, we don't have to run anymore. But we can't stay still. The drive revealed the existence of another conduit, an old friend of Celia's, a financier turned fixer named Ramirez operating out of Quebec. Quiet. Well-connected. Still laundering favors and secrets. Elise asked if we would go after him. I didn't answer at first. But she already knew. This wasn't just my operation anymore. We left Mercer Hollow the next morning. Separate cars. Separate routes. But a shared target. Because sometimes peace is not the absence of war. Sometimes it's the blood pact forged between those still carrying the smoke. It began as reconnaissance. But Elise and I both knew what this was. Revenge, yes, but not the hot kind that burns out quickly. This was cold and coiled, tempered by time and strategy. The kind of revenge you inherit like bad blood. We ran a dry op through Quebec first. Elise posed as a doctoral researcher from an international finance watchdog group. She got herself invited to a symposium where Ramirez was a patron. He was older now, slower, but no less dangerous. The man still wore power like a watch, subtle but precise. I watched from across the street, camera in hand, dressed as another invisible man in the city. Later, in a dim cafe near Viewport, she handed me a slip of paper with a name and a flight itinerary. "He's going to Zurich," she said. "Offshore pivot. If we miss this, it goes dark again." I didn't ask how she got the intel. I could see it in her eyes. She was deeper in this now than I had ever been comfortable imagining. But I also knew this was her choice, not mine. Zurich became the crucible. We moved separately. I set up surveillance with some old friends, contacts who owed me favors or feared what I might know. Elise accessed a shadow terminal from a university server room she'd hacked 3 years ago. She tracked transactions, flagged corporate shells, and finally, pulled the thread that connected Ramirez to the Palmer family trust. Celia had hidden the core of it overseas. And there it was. A fund called Valentine Stone. Established 2 decades ago. Used to fund proxy campaigns, manipulate foreign elections, and pay for silence. Ramirez was the last firewall. Elise wanted to break him open. "We need leverage," I told her. "Not a body." "I know," she said dead calm. "But sometimes leverage bleeds." We staged a false compromise, an intercepted communication implicating him in an embezzlement scandal tied to a rival financier. Then we let it leak. Within days, Ramirez panicked. Tried to flee. Elise was already waiting with a dossier sent anonymously to both Interpol and a major Zurich publication. What happened next happened fast. Arrest. Headlines. The quiet collapse of shadow networks. I thought that would be the end of it. But Elise came to me one night, holding a letter. Her hands shook. "I got a message," she said. "From someone in Brimstead. It's about Mom." Brimstead. Where it all began. The past was circling again. Not to haunt us. To finish what it started. Brimstead hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks. Same restless fog curling through the cedar trees like ghosts with unfinished business. Returning felt like exhaling into an old wound. Elise and I arrived separately by design. We weren't just retracing old steps. We were stepping into a trap we didn't fully understand yet. The letter she received had been unsigned but unmistakably orchestrated. Coordinates. Names. One photograph of her mother. Older, grayer, eyes darker than either of us remembered. Still alive. Or at least, she had been when the photo was taken. The message led us to the Old Mill District, where the Palmer family once held shell companies under fake environmental initiatives. The building was gutted now, a husk of a tax write-off. But what lay beneath it was anything but dead. We found the bunker by following a heat signature Elise had picked up with a modified drone. Inside, servers, documents, and footage. Endless footage. Surveillance logs from decades. Blackmail material, asset transactions, and most chilling, personal files labeled with our names. They'd been watching us longer than we'd thought. And someone had reopened it all. We set the servers to copy to a secure cloud Elise controlled. Then we torched the place. A slow, cleansing burn. One final signature to erase their hold on this town. As the flames devoured the past, I found myself standing outside the old train station. I remembered watching Celia leave once, suitcase in hand, eyes dry. I never thought she'd come back, and maybe she didn't. Maybe whoever she'd become had nothing left of the woman we mourned. Elise stood beside me. "Do you think she's still out there?" I looked toward the smoke. "Maybe. But if she is, she's alone." We stayed one more night in Brimstead, in the same motel where I once lived after being cast out. I didn't sleep. I watched Elise sleeping, her breathing calm, her shoulders relaxed for once. She'd fought so hard for this moment. In the morning, she left ahead of me. I stayed behind just long enough to mail one last envelope. No return address. Just a key inside. A key to a safety deposit box in Zurich containing all the files on Valentine Stone. It would reach the hands of a journalist we trusted. One last move. Not a revenge play. A truth play. I didn't need to watch it unfold. That part of me, the shadow hunter, the ghost father, had finally quieted. Elise and I had burned the pattern. The rest would smolder in its own time. And as I left Brimstead behind again, this time for good, I realized something simple and terrifying. Peace was never something you found. It was something you chose.